You are watching this on the morning after the 13th consecutive night of American strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And if you have been following this war only through the headlines, the ceasefire negotiations, the oil prices, the diplomatic cables moving through Oman and Baghdad, then you have been missing the most operationally significant story of this entire conflict. You have been missing what the United States Navy found, destroyed, and methodically dismantled at a single port city on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz. A city whose name most of the world could not have placed on a map 18 months ago, but whose strategic significance to the global energy system is so vast, so foundational, so operationally decisive, that every naval planner in Washington, every energy trader in London, every intelligence analyst in Beijing has had Bandar Abbas on their threat map for decades. Bandar Abbas, the capital of Iran's Hormozgan province, the headquarters of the Iranian Navy, the headquarters of the IRGC Navy, the home port of Iran's entire Strait of Hormuz interdiction architecture. Its submarines, its drone carrier, its fast attack craft, its coastal surveillance network, its anti-ship missile command infrastructure, its forward operating bases on the islands that bracket the shipping, lanes of the world's most important waterway. Everything that Iran has spent 40 years building to hold the global energy system at gunpoint was based, maintained, serviced, crewed, and commanded from Bandar Abbas. And between February 28, 2026 and today, across 5 months of the most intense naval strike campaign the United States has executed since the Pacific War, the U.S. military has systematically demolished every major military asset that Bandar Abbas contained. This was not an accident. The targeting sequence was not improvised. Every vessel struck, every facility destroyed, every commander killed at Bandar Abbas was on a target package that American military planners had been developing and refining for years before the first bomb fell on February 28th. Because to understand why CENTCOM went to Bandar Abbas first, on the first night, within the first hours of Operation Epic Fury, you need to understand what was actually hiding there, what Iran had assembled at that single base that gave it the operational capability to simultaneously threaten 17 million barrels of daily oil flow, project drone warfare across the Indian Ocean, command a submarine force from underground maintenance facilities, and position a fleet of fast attack craft capable of swarming and disabling commercial vessels in the Strait's shipping lanes on 30 minutes' notice. Iran built Bandar Abbas into a military fortress hiding inside a commercial port. That is the strategic architecture that made it simultaneously so dangerous and so targetable, because the military infrastructure was concentrated, it was identifiable from satellite imagery, and when the decision to strike was made, the intelligence picture of what was sitting in those berths and inside those hardened facilities was comprehensive, current, and lethal in the specificity of its detail. Let's start with what the satellites showed at Bandar Abbas on the eve of February 28, 2026, because the asset inventory at that port on the night before American strikes began is the foundation for everything that follows. Berthed at Bandar Abbas that night was the Iris Shahid Bagheri, Iran's first and only domestically produced drone carrier, a 40,000-ton vessel converted from a commercial container ship called the Persian between 2022 and 2024 at the Iran Shipbuilding and Offshore Industries Complex just outside the city, and commissioned into IRGCN service on February 6, 2025, exactly 22 days before the war that would destroy it began. The Shahid Bagheri was not simply a large ship, it was Iran's most ambitious power, projection platform ever constructed, a vessel equipped with a 180-meter flight deck capable of operating Shahed series combat drones and Bell 412 military helicopters, with a range of 22,000 nautical miles without refueling, a self-sustaining operational, endurance of up to 1 year at sea, and facilities including a military hospital, crew accommodations for extended deployments, and full drone maintenance and launch infrastructure. When IRGC Commander-in-Chief Hossein Salami stood at its commissioning ceremony in February 2025 and described it as capable of projecting Iranian naval power from the Indian Ocean to potentially the Mediterranean, he was not speaking rhetorically. The Shahid Bagheri was the instrument through which Iran intended to transform its regional naval posture into something approaching a global reach capability. It was destroyed within hours of the first American strike. Also berthed at Bandar Abbas was the Iris Makran, Iran's first forward-based ship, converted from a Japanese-built Aframax crude oil tanker into a military vessel capable of supporting helicopter operations and serving as a mothership for IRGC Special Operations Forces, conducting maritime interdiction and clandestine operations throughout the Persian Gulf. The Makran had made several overseas voyages since its commissioning in 2021, extending IRGC naval presence in a manner that alarmed Allied intelligence services, who tracked its transits with increasing concern. Berthed at the submarine pens were 3 Kilo-class attack submarines, Russian-built diesel-electric boats, the most capable, conventionally powered submarines in the Iranian fleet by any measure, the platforms around which every American naval countermeasure plan for the Strait of Hormuz had been built for 20 years. 2 of the kilos were in dry dock under deep refit. A third, the Iran's Tareg, was semi-operational at its home pier. Additionally, a Fateh-class submarine was moored alongside the naval facility, representing one of Iran's indigenously designed medium-range attack boats. Hovering at the submarine pontoons was the Iranian Navy's fleet of approximately 20 Ghadir-class midget submarines, 125-ton vessels, crew of 7, each capable of mine deployment, torpedo attacks, and swimmer delivery operations in the shallow, thermally complex waters of the Strait. And above all of it, commanding all of it, running the entire operational architecture of Iran's Strait of Hormuz interdiction capability from the headquarters buildings on the naval compound's northern edge, was Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, the commander of the IRGC Navy, the man who had spent his entire professional career building this force and preparing it for exactly this confrontation. Everything that followed came from the decision to hit all of it at once. But that was only the beginning. The opening strike on Bandar Abbas was executed with a simultaneity and a comprehensiveness that reflected years of target development and deliberate operational planning. CENTCOM later confirmed that in the first 2 days of Operation Epic Fury, U.S. forces struck more than 1,250 targets across Iran. And Bandar Abbas was not merely on that list. It was at the top of it, because destroying Iran's naval headquarters on the first night was not a symbolic gesture. It was an operational prerequisite for every other objective of the campaign. The Shahid Bagheri was struck within hours of the first bomb falling on February 28th. Planet Labs commercial satellite imagery released on March the 2nd and 3rd showed the naval base with multiple active fires burning simultaneously, thick columns of black smoke rising from the central pier complex, a smaller plume from a struck vessel at berth, and confirmation through imagery analysis that the Iris Makran had been hit at its southern berth position. 1 and potentially 2 frigate-sized warships visible in pre-strike imagery had disappeared from their berths and post-strike frames, replaced by smoke trails and debris signatures consistent with direct strikes on moored naval vessels. Trump stated publicly that 10 Iranian ships had been knocked out, later revising the figure upward, and that Iran's naval headquarters had sustained extensive damage in a separate strike directed at the command and control infrastructure of the compound itself. CENTCOM separately confirmed the sinking of a Jamaran-class corvette, also known as a Mauj-class frigate, at a pier in Chabahar Naval Base on the Gulf of Oman, a facility that had served as Iran's secondary naval hub and forward operating base for Gulf of Oman. Operations. Satellite imagery from Konarak Naval Base showed smoke rising from the naval wharf where the frigate had been docked. A Fateh-class submarine was struck at its Bandar Abbas mooring, imagery showing severe structural damage to the vessel alongside the pier. The Iran's Tareg, the only semi-operational Kilo-class submarine, was confirmed sunk at its home pier in the opening days of March. In the first 72 hours of Operation Epic Fury at Bandar Abbas and the surrounding coastline, the United States effectively destroyed the surface combatant capability of the Iranian Navy, the Artesh Navy, as distinct from the IRGC Navy, reducing it from an operationally active, regionally deployed force to a damaged remnant with no flagship, no forward-based ship, no drone carrier, no operational frigate capability, and no submarines capable of conducting extended patrol operations. Trump described the objective plainly and without diplomatic qualification: annihilating. Iran's naval forces was a core objective, and the satellite imagery that emerged in the days following the initial strikes confirmed that the destruction was not rhetorical. But the campaign against Bandar Abbas did not end in February. It continued methodically and with escalating precision through March and April and into the current July strikes. Because Iran did not stop operating from Bandar Abbas simply because its major surface assets were destroyed. The IRGC Navy, operating from the same geographic location but from hardened coastal facilities, underground missile storage, distributed fast attack craft bases, and the remnants of its Ghadir-class submarine fleet, continued to contest the strait and interdict commercial shipping throughout the ceasefire period and into the resumed strikes of July. And then, on March 26, 2026, the targeting sequence reached its most precise and most operationally significant conclusion. Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, commander of the IRGC Navy since 2018, the architect of Iran's Strait of Hormuz interdiction doctrine, the officer who had commanded Iranian fast boats in the 2016 U.S. sailor detention incident and the 2019 Stena Impero seizure in every subsequent IRGC maritime provocation, was killed in a strike on Bandar Abbas, an Israeli airstrike confirmed by U.S. Central Command, manned as a joint intelligence operation, hit the location where Tangsiri was meeting with senior IRGCN officers. The kill was confirmed. U.S. Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander, posted a direct and unambiguous message on X within hours of confirmation. U.S. military strikes on the IRGCN will continue. Therefore, we call on every Iranian serving in the IRGCN to immediately don their post and return home to avoid further risk of unnecessary injury or death. That statement was not a diplomatic communication. It was a command decapitation announcement delivered simultaneously to the Iranian military, the Iranian public, and every naval force in the world watching the operational conduct of this campaign. The Emises. Sage was precise. The commanding admiral of the IRGC Navy was dead, killed in the headquarters city of the force he commanded, and the United States was publicly and formally calling on the surviving members of that force to cease operations. The real significance was not the death of one admiral. The real significance was what the kill revealed about the intelligence, penetration of Iran's military communications and movement security, the fact that the location, the timing, and the participantes of a senior IRGC command meeting in the most heavily surveilled city in Iranian military geography were known to American and Israeli intelligence with sufficient precision and certainty to authorize and execute a targeted strike. That level of intelligence access does not come from satellites alone. It implies a human intelligence and signals intelligence penetration of the IRGCN command apparatus of a depth and reliability that fundamentally changes the operational calculus for any Iranian military commander attempting to reconstitute the naval force in the months that followed. This is the moment everything shifted. Now let's talk about July 12, 2026, because what happened at Bandar Abbas Naval Harbor on that date represents a weapons employment milestone that has received insufficient analytical attention and that carries strategic implications extending far beyond this conflict and far beyond this adversary. On July 12th, 11 weeks into the resumed strike campaign that began when the ceasefire formally collapsed in early July, U.S. Central Command deployed 3 Saronic Corsair unmanned surface vehicles, sea drones, into the Bandar Abbas Naval Harbor and directed them against the submarine maintenance facility at the base. The Corsair is a 24-foot autonomous surface vessel, built by Saronic Technologies, a Texas-based firm capable of carrying a 1,000-pound payload over 1,000 nautical miles at speeds exceeding 35 knots. It is, in its operational concept, the naval equivalent of a one-way attack drone, an autonomous platform that delivers its warhead to a designated target and does not return. CENTCOM released overhead footage of the attack. 3 small white craft visible from altitude, moving through the harbor water at speed, converging on a raised DOC structure holding a Goddard-class midget submarine out of the water on a maintenance gantry. The footage showed the first impact, then the second, then a third explosion that sent a large fire rolling across the maintenance facility. The submarine on the gantry was destroyed. The hoist mechanism used to lift Ghadir-class submarines out of the water for maintenance was demolished. THE-covered maintenance facility where the hoist transferred submarines for service work had already sustained significant struck-to rail damage from previous strikes and was now rendered permanently non-functional. CENTCOM described this action as the first time American forces had employed sea drones in combat operations. The maritime executive, in its July 14th analysis of the strike, drew the operational conclusion with unambiguous directness. The U.S. Navy attack on the submarine maintenance facility at Bandar Abbas on July 12th marked the end of the Iranian Navy's submarine arm. Let's examine exactly what that statement means, because the full operational picture requires understanding the trajectory of Iran's submarine force from February 28th to July 12th. At the start of the war, as we established in the previous section, the Iranian Navy's submarine capability consisted of 3 Hilo-class boats, 2 in dry dock under refit since 2021, 1 semi-operational, plus a Fateh-class submarine and approximately 20 Ghadir-class midget submarines. Within the first week of Operation Epic Fury, the Iran's Tariq was confirmed sunk at IT's pier. The Fateh-class boat was struck and severely damaged at its Bandar Abbas mooring. The 2 kilos in dry dock were struck. At the naval harbor, their extended maintenance status, meaning they could not be moved or defended. By the end of the first PH-ACE of the campaign, the Iranian Navy's conventional submarine capability, the Kilo-class boats that had represented the prim Arai Western concern about undersea threats in the Persian Gulf for 2 decades, was effectively eliminated. What remained was the IRGCN's Ghadir fleet. 20 approximately 125-ton midget submarines, each crewed by 7 personnel, each capable of operating in the shallow, thermally complex waters of the Strait, where larger submarines are disadvantaged, and each representing the kind of asymmetric, difficult to detect, potentially catastrophic threat to commercial shipping that had defined the strategic concern about Iranian naval power throughout the years leading up to this conflict. The Ghadir-class submarines were not, individually, impressive military platforms, but collectively distributed throughout the coastal geography of the northern Persian Gulf, capable of mine laying and torpedo attack from positions that passive sonar systems find extremely difficult to reliably localize. They represented a persistent, distributed, genuinely dangerous threat that American planners could not simply assume away even after the surface fleet was destroyed. The July 12th strike resolved that problem, not by finding and individually destroying every surviving Gadir through underwater engagements, but through a more elegant and more decisive operational logic. By destroying the submarine maintenance facility's hoist mechanism, the single piece of infrastructure through which Gadir submarines must pass to receive the maintenance that diesel-electric submarines require to remain operational, the U.S. Navy ensured that any Gadir that had survived the previous 5 months of strikes would, within weeks or months, become non-operational through maintenance failure, regardless of whether it was ever directly located and targeted. A diesel-electric submarine that cannot be hoisted from the water for maintenance is a submarine on a countdown timer. Battery. Systems require servicing. Hull penetrations accumulate marine growth that degrades performance. Propulsion components require inspection and repair. The specific technical parameters vary by vessel and operational profile, but the operational logic is absolute. Without the ability to conduct maintenance, a submarine fleet does not remain a submarine fleet. It becomes a collection of progressively more degraded, progressively more dangerous to their own crews, progressively less operationally capable vessels that eventually cannot safely submerge at all. The 3 Saronic Corsairs that hit Bandar Abbas on July 12th did not need to find and destroy 20 Gadir submarines. They needed to destroy 1 hoist. The entire Iranian submarine force, whatever remnant survived, was neutralized by the destruction of a single piece of maintenance infrastructure. And the weapon used to achieve that outcome was not a billion-dollar stealth bomber or a precision cruise missile or a nuclear submarine. It was a 24-foot autonomous boat carrying 1,000 pounds of explosive, manufactured by a Texas company, operated remotely, and delivered to its target through a harbor that the Iranian Navy, which had been watching American strikes hit its base for 5 months, failed to defend. Now, let's connect this directly to what the July strikes have continued to find and destroy along that coastline. Let's establish the current operational picture with the precision that the moment demands, because as of July 24th, 2026, the destruction at Bandar Abbas is not a completed chapter. It is the centerpiece of an ongoing campaign that has expanded its geographic footprint, accelerated its operational tempo, and revealed, through the sequencing of its targeting decisions, a comprehensive American strategy to permanently eliminate every military capability that Iran has built along its coastline to control the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM's statements from the July strikes are operationally specific in ways that reward careful reading. On July 11th and 12th, U.S. forces conducted what CENTCOM described as a 5-hour mission targeting military infrastructure across multiple Iranian locations, including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, a geographic spread that covers the entire Iranian coastline. From the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, bracketing every naval facility, every coastal missile site, and every island-based surveillance and interdiction platform that Iran operates in the Strait's approaches. CENTCOM stated explicitly that forces employed precision munitions against Iranian coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, and maritime capabilities. On July 15th, a 90-minute strike package specifically targeted Greater Tumb Island, one of 3 strategically positioned islands in the Strait of Hormuz that Iran seized from the UAE in 1971 and that have served ever since as forward operating positions for coastal defense systems, radar surveillance, and maritime interdiction capabilities that extend Iranian military reach directly into the Strait's shipping lanes. Researchers who have mapped Iran's defensive architecture in the Strait describe the island chain, Greater Tumb, Lesser Tumb, and Abu Musa, as Iran's arch defense, the outer perimeter of a layered system designed to contest American and commercial access to the Strait from multiple geographic angles simultaneously. Striking Greater Tumb Island is not degrading a peripheral target. It is dismantling the forward edge of the entire Strait interdiction system. The same July 15th operational cycle included strikes on Bandar Abbas itself, with CENTCOM confirming hits on Iranian command centers, air, defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and coastal surveillance facilities. Iranian media reported explosions in Bandar Abbas and in the southern cities of Avaz and Chabahar. Iranian state media reported that projectiles from American strikes hit the Panj Pele fishing pier in Bandar Abbas, destroying at least 30 fishing boats. Civilian damage that Iran has used in its diplomatic and public messaging to portray the American campaign as indiscriminate, even as the operational record shows a targeting sequence directed with systematic precision at military infrastructure. And now connect those ongoing strikes to the naval blockade that provides their strategic context, because the strikes and the blockade together form an integrated operational strategy that is not simply about destroying hardware. It is about restructuring the strategic The U.S. naval blockade of Iran, first imposed on April 13, 2026, following the collapse of the Islamabad talks, then briefly suspended during the ceasefire period, then reimposed in July when the ceasefire collapsed, has, as of today, intercepted 85 vessels attempting to transit to or from Iranian ports, seized 3 ships, and, according to the U.S. estimate that Iran has not contested, is costing Iran $500 million per day in suppressed trade and oil export revenue. That figure, compounded across the months of the blockade's operation, represents an economic pressure of a severity that dwarfs even the direct military costs of the kinetic strike campaign. Iran's ability to fund, supply, and reconstitute the military capabilities that the strikes are destroying is being squeezed simultaneously by the blockade's commercial stranglehold. But the residual threat at Bandar Abbas and along the coastline is not zero, and the campaign is not complete. And this is the intelligence reality that the current strike tempo reflects. Iran has retained, despite 5 months of the most intensive naval strike campaign the United States has conducted since the Second World War, a distributed fast attack craft capability, a coastal anti-ship cruise missile inventory that has been degraded but not eliminated, a mine warfare capability whose full inventory has never been publicly assessed, and a network of coastal radar and surveillance sites that, even as American strikes systematically destroy individual nodes, continues to provide some level of maritime domain awareness to whatever command structure has replaced Tangsiri and the officers killed alongside him. The question that every analyst tracking this campaign is now asking is the same question that the CENTCOM targeting planners are answering through the sequencing of their strikes. At what point does the degradation of Iran's Bandar Abbas-centered maritime interdiction capability cross the threshold from significantly damaged to operationally neutralized? From a threat that requires constant suppression to a threat that has been permanently eliminated? The July 12th Corsair strike on the submarine maintenance facility was the clearest single data point in that trajectory. The maritime executive's assessment was unambiguous. That strike consigned the Iranian Navy's submarine arm to history, not to temporary inoperability, not to a recoverable damage state, to history. The only pathway by which Iran reconstructs a submarine force that poses more than a temporary and rapidly deteriorating danger, the analysis concluded, would be the acquisition of new vessels from a foreign government willing to provide them, a scenario that faces sanctions, interdiction, and intelligence obstacles of the first order. What remains at Bandar Abbas today, July 24, 2026, on the morning after the 13th consecutive night of strikes, is a naval base whose most capable assets have been destroyed, whose commanding admiral has been killed, whose submarine maintenance infrastructure has been demolished, whose drone carrier burned at its pier within hours of the war's opening salvos, and whose forward base ship now sits on the harbor bottom. What remains is a network of fast attack craft, some coastal missiles and hardened sites that the GBU-72 campaign has been progressively eliminating, and the institutional determination of an IRGC Navy that does not yet accept that the capability it spent 40 years building has been consigned to irreversible history. The strikes continue because that determination persists. The campaign is not over because the threat, diminished as it is not eliminated. And the Strait of Hormuz, 17 million barrels per day, 20% of global oil, the most consequential maritime choke point in the history of the modern economy, is still not open to unrestricted commercial traffic. Everything that has been destroyed at Bandar Abbas brought the world closer to the moment when it will be, but the moment has not yet arrived. And until it does, the strikes will continue. And on the 14th night and the 15th, the bombs will fall on whatever the intelligence picture says is still standing on that coastline, and the world that comes after this war will be organized around that fact.